Hi everyone, my name is Viktoria Popovska, and there are 3 things that everyone learns about me probably within the first 5 minutes of meeting me. They are, I'm first-generation Macedonian American, I'm from the great state of New Jersey, and my cat Casper is probably better than you. This presentation and my Keystone research focus on that first fact. Being first-generation Macedonian American is a really important part of my identity, and especially my family's history of immigration and migration has always been really interesting to me as both a historical topic and as the impetus of what I want to do in my future. The history of my family's migration doesn't just start when my parents came to the States in the 90s, but extends back to my grandfather, who was a refugee of the Greek Civil War, and even further back to my maternal great-great-great-grandparents, who were refugees and survived the Balkan Wars. So when I was thinking about this presentation, I asked myself, what is the history of migration among ethnic Macedonians? What does the global Macedonian diaspora community look like? How do they continue to interact with their culture and identity? And how I could translate this research with personal narrative and create something compelling. I've always loved history, but I think history is best when you can find a way to create it humanly and create humanity to attach to it. So I wanted to do this. First, it looked a little different. I did a 50-page book proposal with Professor William McKean, who advised this project, last semester for my professional project. For this Keystone project, I instead decided to do 2 shorter articles, still long, but with New Yorker-style writing and taking inspiration from this article, A Century of Silence, about the author's history, family history with Armenian genocide, and his own personal modern reflections and the impact that has had on his life. My 2 articles, the first is a reflection on kind of the research I did for this project, my summer abroad in Macedonia, my time in DC interacting with the global diaspora community, and second, specifically on the Greek Civil War, not just because it directly impacted my family, but because it was a very large period of migration for ethnic Macedonians. So to give you some context on the global Macedonian diaspora community, they say there's approximately 700,000 Macedonians who live outside of what is known as the Republic of Macedonia. The problem with this number is it's probably wrong and probably a lot higher. And the reason is, there's a few reasons. One being political. Some countries do not take into account certain ethnicities when they do census data, and so that's not tracked properly. Second, because of just the ambiguity of what you define as someone who's Macedonian. Do you define it based on if their family has ties to the Republic of Macedonia, or do you define it as someone who considers themselves ethnically Macedonian? There's a lot of people whose families have never lived within the bounds of what is the modern state of Macedonia, but are ethnically Macedonian, so they may not count. As you can see, US, Canada, Australia are some of the 3 big places outside of Europe where we see Macedonians. And in particular, in Canada, the Toronto area is primarily a large population of aging Macedonians. These are people from what is now northern Greece, and were refugees of the Greek Civil War. The rest of this presentation, I'm going to talk about the Greek Civil War because it is one of my articles, but also because it is very big period of Macedonian migration. When I say Macedonia, I'm going to talk in context of the historical region of Macedonia. That's because this is where ethnic Macedonians are from, without a doubt. Then when I say the Republic of Macedonia, that's the current nation-state of Macedonia. This region was under Ottoman Empire until the fall of the Ottomans in the early 19th century. And post the Second Balkan Wars, it was divided between the great Balkan powers, so Serbia, Bulgaria, and Greece, and this was done with the help of the Western powers. The problem with this is this region was always incredibly diverse, multi-ethnic, multi-religious, very diverse region. And so now these powers, so these countries, Serbia, Bulgaria, Greece, had to grapple with the fact that they were not the ethnic majority in the land that they just annexed. So the way they did, if you know this time period, ethno-nationalism was on an increasing rise, the belief that this should be a homogenous ethno-state. And so the way, specifically looking at Greece, the way they did this was through forced Hellenization efforts, as well as population exchanges. They did population exchanges with Bulgaria and Turkey, and forced Hellenization in terms of changing village names. My family's village is Smrdish. It was changed to Kristalopihi, forcing people to adopt Greek names. My grandfather was baptized with a Greek name. That's not his name. and also just general oppression, repression, not allowed to speak your mother tongue, so many like different things. So this leads to the Greek Civil War, which started in 1946 and ended in 1949. The Greek Civil War is dismissed as a proxy war of the Cold War, because in essence it was Greek Communist Party against the, at that time, Greek democratic monarchy. But for ethnic Macedonians, it wasn't about political ideology at all. My grandfather was born in 1937. Until 2 weeks ago, we thought he was born in 1939. This is, again, just an impact of war and an impact of just displacement. His parents were a very big part of the Greek communist movement, and that's because the Greek Communist Party promised them equal rights in their homelands if they won. This war would end up not being won by the Greek Communist Party, and so is dismissed as just like a win for democracy. But for Macedonians, it was not a win. The end of the war meant that ethnic Macedonians who were part of the Greek Communist Party fled in droves. This led to a lot of different things that continue to be discussed in history today. So one way that a lot of people left were as children, the children refugees, or deca begalci. This is a very big point of tension among Greece and now the Republic of Macedonia. These children, from what we know, were sent out of the northern region of Greece to communist supporting countries for protection. The Greek government still to this day claims that they were stolen. We find that that's not true. My grandfather's brother was part of this drove and ended up living in Romania for the primary portion of his life. My grandfather ended up in what would become the Republic of Macedonia, but he bounced from orphanage to orphanage. My great-grandparents, my great-grandmother ended up in Albania in jail for 9 years after the war. My great-grandfather ended up in Goliotok, which is a Yugoslavian labor camp, and died early. Their family was never whole again, and they never went back to their village. The only thing left of our village is the church. You might see in the picture over there. There's no Macedonians near there anymore. Greece moved a lot, repopulated the area with Greek-speaking, Greek nationalistic people. And this is the story of so many other Macedonians who would never go back to their homeland because the only way they'd be let back is if they took up Greek nationality and Greek identity and completely disregarded their Macedonian identity. And that just wasn't something that they could do. A lot of people went to Canada, like I said earlier. And so it's just a really dark time period for us, and it's not something people talk about because it's, again, a cold proxy war, like for the Cold War. But a really important, really big period, and still has political implications to this day in the Balkans in regards to the context of how the Republic of Macedonia interacts with its neighbors. So it's still very big. I just wanted to talk briefly about how our community still interacts. I want to use social media because I got a lot of my photos from this through these Instagram pages, which are run by people who have Aegean Macedonian descent for the most part. And they're still advocating, trying to remember like their villages. People write books about the villages they've never been back to, trying to like keep, I guess, like that spirit alive. But yeah, I just want to thank y'all for coming here and for listening to me talk about Macedonia. I do it a lot. But yeah, thank you so much.
We will now be taking questions.
Thank you for this presentation. It was very lovely. And thank you for sharing your family's history with us. The question that I have, I remember junior year when we were like mocking up these projects, you were talking a lot about the role of photography in this project. I see all of these amazing photographs that you've shared with us in the presentation. So my question is, what was the relationship with photography in the articles that you wrote? Were they photos that you took themselves, or were they photos from your family's own archive?
Yeah, I think, at least for my family's own archive, it's kind of limited. We don't have a lot of photos for like a variety of reasons. So like the few photos I had on the screen are like all the photos we have from our family for the most part. But I did take a lot from what I said, like Instagram pages, Facebook, because they're photos that like people have scoured for, because it is difficult to find photos from that time period, especially from the region, because it was a very volatile time period. So it is a lot of like, some of the photographs I've seen are so like amazing, and there's few like photo projects from that time period that exist that like really capsulated like what it was like then. So I think photo is really important. Like I am going to like include a lot, but I also continue to make sure to see as much as I can, because I don't know, things surprise me too still when I see some photos. I'm like, oh wow, that's really cool. But yeah, it's a lot of archival photos from like people who go out of their way to find them.
Hi, amazing presentation, and thank you for sharing. My question was, I know you mentioned the longer report that you then adapted into 2 shorter articles. So what made you want to write them as like articles in that format, and then do you have any goals for them moving forward?
Yeah, I think it was just about both accessibility, but also just like time constraint, I think. Like I did my book proposal, but it was like, how am I going to translate this into like something more like bigger? So I felt like articles would be the best way to do that. And I do want to continue in the future in some way with this work. I would like to write, because there are more like periods of migration. The Balkan Wars was also a very pivotal time. And then like post-Yugoslavia and during Yugoslavia. So I would love to continue doing this, and like would like want to hear other people's stories, because I had the chance to hear about other people's families. I didn't integrate it like in this presentation, but it is really interesting to hear other people, because I didn't know. I guess we're always limited to like our own lives a lot of the time, and our own experiences. So I would love to be able to maybe write more articles or find a different way to translate it to encapsulate more people's stories.
Hi. One of the, well, I'm a historian and an anthropologist, and one of the main discussions about nationalism is that, especially, and this applies a lot to Southeastern Europe generally, where, as you mentioned, it was an extremely diverse geography. And the word Macedonia itself historically was a name for a province as opposed to necessarily an ethnic identity, right? And we know from studies of nationalism that nations are made through modern periods. People start imagining themselves as part of larger communities as opposed to members of towns, villages. And one of the most recent books, for instance, written on Ottoman Macedonia, starts with a paragraph. People thought of themselves as belonging to smaller units with neighbors from different linguistic groups, different religious groups. And what we call nationalism, and usually Southeast Europe is a central laboratory for nationalism, is when people start identifying with groups that are more monolithic, based on linguistic markers, religious markers, as opposed to, let's say, sharing a city, sharing a town with fellow others. How does the story of Macedonian ethnic identity fit in the larger problem of nationalism? How did contemporary Macedonian identity came to be formed, and with reference to which central markers, language, religion, how did that become a dominant definition, how that the dominant definition of identity came to be in contemporary terms?
Yeah, so nationalism is a huge problem in the Balkans and continues to be a problem because of just the impact and tension it causes. In terms of Macedonian identity, like I said, like there are people who, at least modernly right now, there are people who consider themselves Macedonian ethnically, but don't have any ties to the Republic of Macedonia. I have a friend who's like this, and I think it just goes back to the question of just like how we identify and what rights we give to people to identify themselves. And I think everyone has the right to identify as they most feel like comfortable and fit in their family history. I can tell you my family has identified as Macedonian for as far back as we can like recount. That's not to say that other people don't. Like, there is that like argument that like people from the region of Macedonia, from northern Greece, also regionally identify Macedonian. They have every right to do that. They don't have the right to tell me I can't identify Macedonian. And I think that's just the broader conversation of like how do we how do we talk about identity, nationalism? Like, it's a very intense conversation. It's very big in the Balkans, continues to play a role in our politics. It's something that, like, the West doesn't understand too well. So when they come in and try to, like, mess with us, they don't really understand the implications of it. But I think at the end of the day, it's a conversation that needs to be had further, but I don't know. It's kind of rough.
Thank you, Victoria.
Thank you.